Friends often ask why I like trams because they say it's quite a specific interest and an unusual one for someone like me who grew up in Sydney at a time for the first 30 years of my life no trams ran in Sydney at all, except perhaps down at Loftus. But as kids, we all had an interest in something, I think. And at my school, we used to play with various trading cards. Some were on planes, some were about trains, some were ships. And while there were no tram cards, I did like the train ones. I also did like the rugby league cards. But I guess the point is, we all have interests, and it's hard to know why we have them to start with. My interest's always been trains and trams. So it's a bit different for BackTracks today to be making a video on not only trams, but also on buses. So today, it's a 3-for-1 deal, if you like, because we'll look at the Manly Tram Depot, which then became the Manly Bus Depot, which then closed and moved to become the Brookvale Bus Depot. And the reason we're doing it this week was that BackTracks was able to attend the Brookvale Bus Depot Open Day last weekend, which was pretty good fun. Firstly, it was great to go inside a working depot, which is usually restricted to the public, but also then to see about 8 buses through the ages, right from the time of trams through to the future of the bus network. And we got a tour of the workshop, which we'll show in the second half of this video. I'm Marty, and welcome to BackTracks. For the entire length of time the Manly tram system was in operation, it was serviced by the Manly Tram Depot. That depot opened in 1903 as a steam tram shed, and it just had 2 tracks. And it was rebuilt in 1911 for electric trams, then with 6 tracks. It served the isolated Manly lines, with the lines such as those to the Spit, to Harbord, and all the way up to Narrabeen. At its peak in 1924, the depot had a total staff of nearly 80 people, with 26 drivers, and the rest being conductors and office staff. And its maximum peak hour capacity had 18 cars out in operation out of the 23 that were stored there. Now originally, the trams were H and J class, and when the Brookvale line was electrified, it was also then served by O-class cars, and by 1914 all the lines were using O-class. The Manly depot closed as a tram depot along with the whole Manly network in September 1939, and then buses replaced the trams at the depot. The tram shed is still standing today and has remained true to its 1914 form right to this day, with the only main change being that the water tower from the steam tram era has since been removed. The shed continued to be used by buses until it was adopted for commercial use as a car dealership, and now today as a Harris Farm supermarket. It's actually a pretty good supermarket. It's pretty pricey, but you can get a good range of products you don't get to see in other major chains. Now the buses remained there until 1952 when the new Brookvale Bus Depot was open, and that bus depot remains in operation there till today. Brookvale Bus Depot is a bus depot in the Sydney suburb of Brookvale that operates bus and on-demand services for the northern beaches and the lower North Shore of Sydney. It has an allocation of around 240 buses. In October 2021, it was transferred from the State Transit Authority to Kelios Downer Northern Beaches as part of the Region 8 contract. Kelios Downer operates a number of transit systems, including the G-Link light rail on the Gold Coast, the Newcastle light rail, and Yarra trams in Melbourne. As I mentioned at the opening, I haven't really had a big interest in buses, mainly because I used to catch them every day to school, and that was somewhere I didn't really want to go. But now over the years, the buses I used to catch have become museum pieces. So it was really interesting to see some of these childhood memories, and some that I didn't ever catch, on display here at the Open Day. So all the buses here at the Open Day had some connection to the northern beaches. So let's go from oldest to newest, and the first was the Albion Ventura double-deck bus. After World War II, a total of 845 double-decker buses were ordered from AEC, Albion and Leyland in the United Kingdom. These buses were designed to slowly replace the trams as the lines closed up till 1961. Albion of Glasgow, Scotland supplied 143 of these Albion Ventura chassis. And now the Albions became synonymous with the Warringah area, being the mainstay of Sydney's longest bus route, the famous 190, which ran all the way from Wynyard to Palm Beach. And it operated that bus run from 1948 to the late 1970s. Now, in that same era, the Leyland Titan double-decker bus arrived on the scene in Sydney. There were 203 of this type, and they were supplied by Leyland Motors of England. Now, this bus here, 2033, entered service in 1948. Now, interestingly, it entered in the Burwood area, and it was one of the replacement vehicles for the Ashfield and Burwood to Mortlake and Cabarita tramway. Now, in 1950, this bus was transferred to Newcastle, where it worked for another 18 years, and then in 1968, it returned to Sydney and went to Randwick Depot, then to Kingsgrove Depot, and it stopped working as a regular bus in September 1972, and it was later preserved by the State Transit Authority. As the closure of the Sydney tram network increased pace in the 1950s, the New South Wales government ordered 3 batches of underfloor type buses. The first 100, which were called Leyland Royal Tigers, and AEC Regal 4s, were delivered in 1953 and 1954. And this was followed by a further order of 250 buses. Now, this bus here, the Leyland Royal Tiger Worldmaster, they had cool names, didn't they, was one of the 125 buses of this type that was supplied by Leyland Motors of England in the late 1950s. The next bus we'll talk about is the Leyland Atlantean, another cool name, a double-decker bus that was one of the 244 that were made and supplied by British Leyland of England from 1970 right up until 1986. The first Atlanteans were delivered to the Brookvale and Monavale depots. Now, these were designed for one-man driver-only operation, and so these Atlanteans were subject of a bitter dispute between the unions and the Public Transport Commission at the time regarding the phasing out of conductors. This bus here, 1003, entered service in 1970 and was withdrawn in March 1981 after an accident. In the late 1960s, 232 Leyland Leopards, another great name, entered service. These became known as the Mark I or Green Leopards. This order was followed by a further order of 200. These became known as the Mark II or Blue Leopards. And then a final order of 312 Blue Leopards followed. Now, this bus here we're looking at, 1763, was the last bus of this order. So in total, 745 Leyland Leopards were delivered. Now, bus operations on the northern beaches and Warringah area have always needed high-capacity buses to cope with peak hour loads. Now, the Mercedes-Benz articulated bus, or Bendy bus, were 30 buses of this type that were supplied by Mercedes-Benz of Germany from 1981 to 1984. Now, these so-called Bendy buses were pretty big and they could carry up to 109 passengers. Bendy buses still run on the northern beaches to this day. Now we're really in the present day now. The second last bus we'll look at is the BLine. It's a 27-kilometre bus route that runs between Wynyard in the centre of the city of Sydney to Mona Vale on the northern beaches. It began operation in November 2017 and operates 24 hours a day with 38 double-deck buses. Now, while we're looking at the BLine here at Brookvale Depot, the BLine buses actually are worked out of the Mona Vale Depot, also operated by Kelios Downer. Now looking into the future, Kelios Downer will introduce 125 electric buses over the next 8 years, with Brookvale being one of the 2 depots that will operate the new Custom Denning Element 2. Now, the Custom Buses website had a lot of info and videos on the Element 1, but I couldn't find any specific details when the first buses will start operating out of Brookvale, but they look pretty cool. One of the highlights of the open day at Brookvale was being able to go on a tour of the workshops, something that most punters wouldn't normally get to do. Now, the workshop at Brookvale apparently is one of the largest in Sydney and it operates 24 hours a day. It can do a heap of different things in terms of maintaining the network. It holds up to 7,000 parts and manages the 240 buses that are stored at the depot. Apparently, the place can do body fabrication, they can do electrical work, a whole range of engineering, including gears, brakes, and engines. And there's also a bay for spray painting buses. 30 people work in the workshop. And it's a pretty busy place because some of the buses at the depot have run nearly 1.4 million kilometres before they exited the fleet. So it takes a lot of time to keep them on the road. And apparently overnight is one of the busiest times of the workshop because they're busy replacing the most common issue, which is knocked off mirrors. replacing and retreading tyres, cleaning and refueling the buses. During the tour we found out that they changed nearly 30 tyres a week, and we asked why a lot of mirrors get knocked off. Well, the simple answer is that the buses were designed for roads that are actually wider than they drive on, particularly around the Spit Bridge. And finally, they showed us the bus washing area and also the place where they will convert to manage and recharge the electric buses. So there you have it, the story of a steam tram depot that became an electric tram depot, that then became a bus depot, that then moved a couple of kilometres up the road to become one of Sydney's largest bus depots. Well, that about wraps up another Backtracks. Thanks for watching. And if you haven't, please like and subscribe. And thanks always to our information sources that make these videos possible. And hopefully we'll see you next time when we take another look at the history of trams and maybe some buses on Backtracks.